From News and Information 570 AM, this is the Sedgefield Report.
Well, I will tell you what, I have deep concerns about what happens with the John Wiley Price trial. The Dallas County Commissioner, longtime commissioner, your man downtown, who faces a whole host of charges, a slew of charges, and could skate on some of them. I'm skeptical on how this case was put on. I do believe he's guilty of taking bribes. I absolutely believe it. I know that his votes were bought. But the way the case was played out, I'm not convinced it goes down that way, and that's unfortunate. To talk about all of this is Chris Lewis. He's with Crane, Lewis, and Brogdon, an attorney who was in for much of the trial and witnessed it, and we're happy to have you back on the show, Chris.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Grant.
So I'm worried about this one. I think John Wiley Price, there's a good chance he skates.
You know, listen, there's a lot of counts against him, and the tax counts, the filing false tax returns or not claiming the income. I think that's their safety net here. But, yeah, I mean, I sat during closing arguments today, and from the government's perspective, there's a lot to be worried about.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, the income tax evasion goes all the way down back to Al Capone, right? I mean, he used to say, if you're going to get me for murder, get me for murder. Don't get me for spitting on the sidewalk, talking about income tax evasion. And really, that is always the safety net when the government makes its case. And I guess from the Dallas County voters' perspective, who are tired of all the shenanigans from John Wiley Price, does it really matter how he goes away, as long as he goes away? But there's something wrong if he doesn't come off convicted of bribery here, because I think anybody with a reasonable amount of common sense can look at this and say there certainly were shenanigans going on.
Yeah, and I guess the big question, Grant, is whether or not those shenanigans rise to the level of being criminal, and has the government done a good enough job of convincing the jurors beyond all reasonable doubt? And I got to sit in a little bit. I mean, I saw all of the government's presentation this morning and got to sit in for quite a bit of Tom Mills's closing argument this afternoon. And Tom did a good job of going through and chipping away at the credibility of the FBI agents and the credibility of the government in this case.
Where are the holes as far as the bribery goes with John Wiley Price?
The holes are, number one, you don't have any of the vendors that have come through and said that there was a specific agreement that his vote was for sale and that Kathy Neely was the one that was putting that together. You don't have that. What you do have, though, is you have a lot of payments for cars, for insurance, for land. You have a lot of checks going to a lot of different accounts. So you have a lot of circumstantial evidence. And when I say a lot, the government has a ton of circumstantial evidence against him.
All right. So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, the vendors were paying Kathy Neely as a consultant. Says, oh, yeah, if you want to get something through, you got to talk to Kathy Neely. She can help you get things through the county. They're paying her a consulting fee, correct?
That's right.
And so the vendors never actually paid for the cars for John Wiley Price. They were just paying Kathy Neely these consulting fees.
That's correct.
All right, so Kathy Neely then, when you look at it a free market perspective, the only way you're going to be successful as this person who can get everything through is if you actually get everything through. So she then, the allegations are, goes to John Wiley Price, her good friend or mentor, whatever you want to call her, and she's the one paying for the cars and the extravagant items.
That's right.
So the bribery then becomes, is Kathy Neely the one bribing John Wiley Price? The vendors are not really involved. I guess in some respects they were duped in all of this too.
Yeah, I guess that's the perspective, is that they were duped, because I doubt there would have ever been the conversation if this was what was going on, that Kathy Neely is saying, hey, I've got John Wiley Price in my pocket. He's going to do whatever I want him to do, and then all of a sudden they would think that there was something nefarious going on. I doubt there was ever that conversation. It was probably more a result of Kathy Neely was known as somebody who could get things done, much like political consultants.
So Kathy Neely would be a complete idiot to tell the vendors the first part of what you said. Hey, I got John Wiley Price in my pocket. You've got to pay me hundreds of thousands, and I'll make it happen. She opens herself up to way too many issues there. And one, the more people you tell, obviously, the greater chance there is that someone is going to drop a dime on you. And so I do believe, though, that she probably went to them and says, I have great contacts, and I am very good at pushing things through. This is why you should be paying me. And I'm sure, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, John Wiley Price was doing whatever Kathy Neely wanted him to do, as long as she kept paying the bills.
You would think so, which if that were the case, you would have to look at all of Kathy Neely's clients and all of the votes that came up, and was John Wiley Price in lockstep with Kathy Neely's clients on all of those important votes? And the government would say yes. However, we know from reading the paper recently and some things that Judge Barbara Lynn has said that wasn't the case. He didn't always vote for Kathy Neely's clients or for things that benefited her clients.
Yeah, and then did they go back and see how much were those clients paying compared to other clients? I mean, that's a whole web that and that's what makes me so concerned about this, is maybe they did a good job of covering their tracks. What is insane to me is that John Wiley Price would make deposits into his bank account, and that Kathy Neely would write checks, that they would actually write checks back and forth to each other.
Well, and I think the government did a good job of pointing that out, that that was happening for a time period. But then things began to change when Kathy Neely got audited, I think in 05 or 06. Also, the government made a big point today about how John Wiley Price had a bunch of different bank accounts, and that Kathy Neely was making direct deposits into those bank accounts. So she wasn't necessarily writing a check to John Wiley Price that he was then cashing. There were a lot of checks that she just wrote directly to his bank account.
And were the checks on her checkbook? Was it her checkbook?
They were on her checkbook, but then there were others. I believe there were some with because they showed some of these during closing argument, some on her checkbook, but others in the name of certain businesses. And part of the government's problem in this case, I think, is keeping the jury's attention, letting the jury know that there is indeed some victim. Juries don't get real riled up if there's not an identifiable victim. But all of the companies that they talked about that John Wiley Price was associated with, and all of the vendors that Kathy Neely was associated with, and then all of the figures and everything that happened in this financial type of situation, I really think over a course of 4, 6, 8 weeks, it tends to put the jury to sleep, and they get to the point where they really don't care.
Yeah. I was very concerned about how long the government's case took, because people are human. And I've covered enough trials in my day when I was an old reporter to know that you sit in that courtroom, man, you start to lose attention. And I promise you, if I'm doing it and I got to go on TV to report about it, I promise you the jury's losing their attention too. And it shouldn't be so complicated. If it's so complicated for you to prove, there may be a problem with your case.
I think that's absolutely right. And when you've got a situation that went on, and Tom Mills brought it up, he was very folksy. He related to the jury, but he said, I don't know how long they've been on this case, 10 or 15 years, but he made a very, very strong point. If you've been investigating somebody, unbeknownst to them for 10 or 15 years, about crimes that are financial in nature where the evidence is still there, you should be able to put together a solid, impenetrable case.
Yeah, I was. It also brings up my other concern when this first came out. And then we saw this investigation go on and on and on. Typically, when the FBI gets involved, they make very strong cases, especially in public corruption cases. You rarely ever see them lose public corruption cases. But as this dragged on, my first light bulb going off was saying, what is wrong? They don't have it. They don't have the goods on the guy.
Well, and the other thing that I would be concerned about, and they shouldn't have to be concerned about this either side, but it's just the reality these days with social media and with news being at our fingertips, is we have learned a lot about what's been going on behind the scenes. And when the juries in the jury room, and the lawyers are talking about the government not turning over evidence, about the judge contemplating throwing out some of the counts and the jury not even being able to decide those. If some of that information through family members or from jurors possibly reading news stories, if some of that information is getting back to the members of the jury, I mean, that too could have an impact on their decision.
Yeah, the fact that the government didn't turn over certain amounts of evidence, that seems to me like Legalese 101, isn't it, Attorney Chris Lewis?
Yeah, you turn it all over. You don't ever want to be in the situation because the bad part, obviously, if the judge says you can't use a certain witness or certain evidence gets excluded, that's bad. That's the worst case scenario. But in reality, the worst thing that can happen in a case is that you lose credibility with the jury. And once you've lost credibility with the jury, you're not going to win many cases.
So here's the end result as I take away from this conversation. He most likely gets convicted of the tax evasion charges. We'll see what happens on the bribery charges. But without a doubt, with all the circumstantial evidence, you can't always convict on circumstantial evidence. I have no doubt in my mind, though, John Wiley Price was selling his votes to Kathy Neely. I have no doubt about it.
You know, listening to it, being a person that was in the courtroom and detached, the evidence for the government's case seemed extensive and it seemed strong. Yeah. But you don't have a bunch of lawyers sitting on the jury. You don't have a bunch of people that are familiar with how these cases are tried sitting on the jury. And, you know, I really think that this is a case where both sides have done what they can do. Certainly there have been some blunders. And I guess my money right now would be on, not to use an inappropriate euphemism, but my money would probably be on the jury splitting the baby, convicting him on some counts, acquitting him on the others.
Yep, there you go. Well, Attorney Chris Lewis, it's great having you on and watching it firsthand inside the courtroom. Your expertise and your assessment is very valuable to all of us, and we appreciate you coming on the program.
Thanks for having me, Grant. I appreciate it.
All right, you got it. I'm Grant Stinchfield. What do you think about John Wiley Price? 888-787-KLIF, 888-787-5543. Let's go to Nikki Wiley in the 570 KLIF right now, Traffic Center. Nikki.